If there's one thing that I absolutely hate about the Sony a7S III, then that's color grading S-Log footage. Doesn't matter if S-Log2 or 3. And that's particularly because I come from a Fujifilm X-T4, which has insanely good colors straight out of camera and a very easy color grading process, even in F-Log. But fortunately, I found a LUT pack that makes it very easy to get pretty much the same colors as on the Fujifilm X-T4, especially for Eterna and Classic Chrome. That's what I tested here. So today I want to share that with you. Okay, I want to start this video by saying that I'm not sponsored or affiliated with the creator of this LUT pack. The creator is Colorizer. I will leave a link to that LUT pack in the description below. He actually has different LUT packs, like one for Sony S-Log2, but he also has LUT packs for F-Log, for example, to convert F-Log to Eterna and Classic Chrome, etc. Like, you don't really need Eterna, but especially Classic Chrome, I found that nice to have already on the Fujifilm X-T4. And he also has some different LUT packs for other cameras there. So just check it out. LUT pack is just $35, and I think that's a very reasonable price considering how accurate colors you can get with this pack. So I would say let's have a look at some tests that I did here. Okay, I did some test shots with both the Sony a7S III and my Fujifilm X-T4. I tested it in Eterna and Classic Chrome, which are my favorite profiles, and I flattened both profiles out. So I set the tone curve both in the highlights and shadows to -2 on the Fuji camera. On the Sony, I used S-Log2 with gamut set to 3-point cine, which is recommended for those LUTs. And what I could see directly in the test shots is that when you set the Fujifilm X-T4 to +0.6 exposure and the Sony a7S III to +1.7 exposure, then the exposure levels, especially for the skin tones, match pretty good. So that's what I can recommend here to use. And on both cameras, I had the white balance set to the sunny preset, so I did not set the Kelvin preset manually. So by looking at the footage, I can definitely tell that the colors are not exactly the same. Like in the example here, you can see that on the bottom I have the Fuji files, and this is recorded in Eterna here in the first clip. And when we overlay that and switch a bit in between, you can clearly see that the skin tones are not the same, even with the green tones, etc. in the background. That all looks pretty good, but the skin tones clearly are a bit more yellowish on the Sony camera, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because when you look at the vector scope, comparing here the skin tones only, you can definitely tell that the Fuji colors are actually a bit too red. So the Sony colors in that case are actually a bit more accurate. And so overall, I would say it just depends on what you like more. If you really want to go for the Fuji look, then you have to add a bit of red to the skin tones in post. Otherwise, if you want to go for a more natural skin tone look, then better adjust your Fuji camera to Sony if you want to match both cameras. And maybe you've recognized that I have color wheels here applied on the Sony footage. So what I did here is I reduced the saturation a little bit, because I've set the saturation in my Sony camera to +10, so to make it a bit easier to color grade. And that's why I had to readjust a bit for that. So basically, if you would just leave it at 0 in the Sony a7S III, then it should fit pretty good. I think what also could be the reason for the color shift here in the face is that on the Sony a7S III, they actually use a bit different color science as they use on the Sony a7 III, for example. So as far as I know, the skin tones on the Sony a7 III, they were supposed to be a bit more purple, if I'm not wrong. So it could be that if you have a Sony a7 III or a7C, whatever, like whatever uses the old color science, like it's my first Sony camera, the a7S III, then you would likely get more accurate skin tones, like more accurate in terms of matching the Fuji colors, not more accurate in terms of actually being accurate skin tone. And when we come to the Classic Chrome shot here, we can also see exactly the same, like the skin tones don't match perfectly. Rest looks pretty good. Sony is here a bit more contrast, I would say, but also we have a bit more blue in the sky, so you can definitely tell there is a bit more dynamic range in the S-Log footage. And I think that the creator of this LUT pack did a good job to preserve the dynamic range after applying the LUT. It's not that suddenly your highlights go blown out and so on. And I actually like that about this LUT pack, because it gives you a really good starting point for grading. So it tries to be as close as possible to the Fuji colors, but without like breaking the highlights highlights and shadows, so that's great. And that one here surprised me a little bit. There I shot in F-Log on the Fuji, and then I applied a LUT from the same manufacturer from Colorizer, the F-Log2 Eterna DR100 LUT. So I converted F-Log basically to Eterna here. This is not the original Fuji LUT though, this is from him. And here I had to actually raise the saturation a little bit to get it to the same level where the Sony was. So it was a bit undersaturated without that, but also not a big issue. But aside from that, also exactly the same thing here with the skin tones. The skin tones are a bit more yellowish on the Sony camera. I also got another shot both in Eterna and Classic Chrome, and this is with some flowers in the background. So originally I wanted to see how other colors keep up, and what I recognized here directly, because I had the sun shining in my face, I had to raise the highlights a bit with the Sony footage to get it to the same level as the Fujifilm is. And again, I used exactly the same exposure, like plus 0.6 on the Fuji and plus 1.7 on the Sony. And as you can see here, after raising the highlights, it's exactly the same again. Like the overall colors in the background look pretty similar, maybe a bit difference in the saturation, but that's fine. And the skin tones again have exactly the same shift. So overall, I must say it's really not bad, and I think that the skin tone shift is really just because of the new Sony color science, and maybe it's just not adjusted for that. But to be honest, this is a very easy fix in post. Like you can use your hue versus saturation curves or a vector tool to compensate for that. And what I mostly like about this LUT pack is that even if the colors are not perfectly accurate, like or perfectly matching to the Fuji, I can get a very good starting point for my color grades here with the Sony a7S III. Because to be honest, over the past few weeks, I shot a lot in S-LOG3, I shot in S-LOG2, I tried everything to like find my settings on this camera, and then I used the original Sony LUTs to convert that. And yeah, I watched many tutorials. Like I overexposed by 2 stops, by 1.7 stops, etc. Like many tutorials say, and I also try to expose normally, but it never really gave me a like consistently good starting point. I actually found myself still using the X-T4 very much. I would actually say I use it a bit more than the Sony a7S III, at least for B-roll shots, just because I like the colors so much and I know how easy the workflow is. And yeah, now you having a pretty similar workflow actually on the Sony a7S III definitely helps me a lot. And so I would say if you also like Fuji Colors especially, then that's a good one. And if you're looking for a less artistic and more color accurate LUT, then you should definitely try out the Leeming LUT. I bought that as well and tried it out, but it's definitely a bit longer process. Like especially in the camera, I would say it's not really good for run and gun shooting because you really have to nail the exposure all the time. Of course, there are ways to compensate for that in post, but that's not ideal, obviously. But if you're looking for more accurate colors and less artistic, then definitely the Leeming LUT is a good starting point there. And I, like from my experience, what I tried, it's definitely better than the original Sony LUT. So in that case, I would recommend that. So how do you color grade S-LOG2 and 3 footage from the Sony a7S III? If you have a bit different process that works good for you, leave it in the comments below, please. I actually love to have multiple processes there, because sometimes, you know, like you want to do something different or so. It's always good to have something. And aside from that, I really hope this video was helpful. If you just got the Sony a7S III and you also don't know what to do with your colors, if yes, then leave me a thumbs up. And also don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell notifications button for upcoming videos. I publish 1 to 2 tutorials every week, and I hope to see you in the next one.